Do you want to hear a story of true love? A story that usually never even crosses our minds to think of it this way? Because it looks nothing like what we call love today. It has no romance, it has no tears, no emotions, or any unnecessary dramas. What it has is a king, 300 men, and a narrow pass between the mountains and the sea. It is the story of Leonidas at Thermopylae, and it is the purest story of Philotes ever written. Philotes, the word the Greeks preferred over Agape, love. But to understand why this love and how it operates, we must first understand what enemy means, what Agape means, what Philotes is, what it really means to give space, and what all of these things have to do with your consciousness. Let's start with space, shared space, in time. The Greek word for forgiveness does not mean what you think. And once you understand that, hatred almost disappears by itself. We are told to forgive people, to let go of anger, to be compassionate. But the original Greek word for forgiveness reveals something very different. The word is Synchoresis, and it literally means to give space. And this is the meaning of forgiveness in Greek. Now, let's pause here for a second. Horos is space. Ora is time. So we have space and time, space-time. Syn means together. Horos also means space or room. Chora is country. Chora is the capital of an island. Now, there are different linguistic views on these similarities. One side will tell you they are just coincidences, accidental homonyms, but in Greek there are far too many of these coincidences to ignore. So the other school of thought, the one I prefer because it makes you think much deeper, believes there is a much deeper ontological meaning hidden beneath the surface. To keep things moving now, for the sake of this video, I've put the full explanation of this connection in the description below, because it has to do with the accents, the polytonic system of writing. But just for the sake of this video, just follow the logic. Horos means space or room. To make room, to give space, to allow something to exist within a space. So the original meaning of forgiveness in Greek was not primarily moral, it was spatial. To forgive meant to give someone space within your field of understanding. So to forgive is to understand what? To understand that everyone is at a different level of evolution, and one can perceive what they are capable of perceiving at their level of being. When you begin to see forgiveness this way, something interesting happens. Forgiveness stops being a moral obligation imposed from the outside and instead becomes a form of understanding. Because once you observe human behavior carefully, you begin to notice something simple but very profound. People can only perceive what their level of awareness allows them to perceive. And that alone resolves any kind of hate. As Empedocles is saying, they believe they have found the whole, but they only see the tiny fragment they happen to stumble upon. So each one is convinced only of that which they have personally encountered, but they think they know the whole picture. Nothing more, nothing less, and this idea appears clearly in Greek philosophy. In Plato's Republic, he describes different levels of knowledge, different levels of consciousness, and he calls them Ikasia, imagination or speculation, pistis, which is belief, diania, which is reasoning, and noesis, which is direct understanding.
Now, I've analyzed Plato's divided line in many of my videos. My older subscribers know this by heart now, and I appreciate your patience. But I will keep bringing it up because until we understand the different levels of perception from ikasia to noesis, we cannot truly understand space, time, forgiveness. So bear with me once again. It's worth the reminder, and it's good for the newer subscribers.
People perceive reality according to the level they occupy. Someone standing at one level literally cannot see what exists above it. So when you realize this, deeply contemplate on it, hatred begins to lose its meaning. Because the person in front of you may not be acting out of pure malice. Often they are simply acting within the limits of their perception. They see the world from the level they inhabit. And that's all they can see. Once you recognize this, forgiveness becomes something very different. It becomes the recognition that every person moves within a different horizon of understanding. However, Greek thought never promoted passivity. Understanding another person does not mean erasing yourself. So there's other things that need to be considered here: measure, moderation, balance, and justice. And this idea appears in a very beautiful explanation from an ancient Greek dictionary, the Etymological Magnum. Etymological Magnum, under enemy, gives the word a very philosophical approach, purely functional, almost kinetic, and almost mathematical. I'll say it in Greek first, and then I will explain right after. Echthros, εκ του θωράν το πηδάν, και εκ του θωρώ, θωρήσω, γίνεται οχθόρος, και συγκοπεί εχθρός ο εξ ημών προδιερχόμενος, παρά το έξω ημών είναι και πηδάν. Enemy, derived from thoran, which means to leap, to spring forth. And from thoro comes the word εχθόρος, and by syncope, εχθρός, the one who passes in front of us while being outside of us, due to the fact that he exists outside of us and leaps into our path. So who is the enemy? Enemy is the one who appears in your way and distracts your flow. We have no hate, no sentiments, no nothing.
To truly understand this, imagine two wrestlers. They have the same build, the same strength, the same years of experience. The first one totally loses his temper. He gets angry, he goes into a frenzy. He does have a momentum, but he's blind. The second one maintains absolute stillness, complete calmness. Who will win? The second one, every single time. Why? Because he possesses observation. And when you have observation, time feels as if it's slowing down. You suddenly have the space to see the movement before it even happens. The calm wrestler doesn't fight his enemy with hatred. He treats him as a kinetic problem to be solved. He doesn't react to the anger. He calculates the whole trajectory. So by remaining still, he kind of stretches the moment and he creates the space that is needed to let the opponent's own force defeat itself. And this can be applied to many situations.
So we all know this famous phrase, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, it existed long before Christianity, but with a small, crucial detail added to it. Αγάπα τον πλησίον σου, Μικρά Ελαττούμενος. Elattoumenos means withdrawal or lessening. To lessen, to reduce, to withdraw slightly. You give the necessary ontological space for the other, but the spirit of it is that love your neighbor with the minimal damage to yourself. Because there is this small, crucial word in the phrase, Mikra. Mikra is small measure. It is a spiritual regulator. It is discernment. The ancient Greek dictionary warns us against the dangers of love without discernment, which could lead to either hubris or self-destruction. The diminishing must be small measure. The small detail changes everything. Because if the self disappears completely, something very important disappears with it. If the self diminishes entirely and without limit, and the subject disappears, the capacity to real love disappears entirely. There's no longer a center from which real love can flow. And ancient Greek thought warned against this kind of imbalance. And this leads to hubris, the excess that destroys harmony. So to love in small measure, diminishing only slightly yourself, means one must retain their internal integrity so they may continue to be a source of real love. And here we can see something else, that hubris does not simply mean arrogance in the modern psychological sense. The word hubris refers to an act of violent excess. It is a force that is violating the natural balance of things. In classical Greek usage, it often means outrage, recklessness, violence, or the abuse of power. In other words, it is not just pride, it is excess that becomes destructive. Now, when love loses measure, it can also become a form of hubris, not because love itself is wrong, but because the balance between self and the other collapses. In this case, the violence is not longer directed outward, it is directed inward. A person begins to violate their own limits. They ignore their own center. And when that happens, the capacity for true love gradually disappears because love requires a center from which it can flow.
You see, there are two sides to this imbalance. There is the one who loves and oppresses, and the one who loves and is oppressed. On one hand, you have the ego that expands until it crushes the other person's space. So this is hubris as aggression. But on the other hand, you have the ego that shrinks until it vanishes. The person who allows themselves to be stepped on, thinking maybe that this is a sacrifice or whatever, both are violating the metron. The oppressor destroys the other's center, and the oppressed destroys their own. So in both cases, the space, the horos for a real relationship is gone, is non-existent. One is total mess, the other one is a prison. And this can be applied again to many situations, to ideological situations, to political situations, and so on. And this is exactly why the ancient Greeks never promoted an unconditional blind love. They understood that for love to be a creative force, it must be geometrical. It must follow the rule of Mikra Elattoumenos, small conscious adjustments. You give enough space for the other to exist, but you never give away the ground upon which you stand, because when you maintain your center, you are no longer a victim or an oppressor. You become exactly like the calm wrestler we discussed. You have the clarity to see the hubris of the world without letting it become your own.
If the person disappears completely, there's no longer a source. Ancient Greek thought always insisted on measure, on Metron, not coldness, not selfishness, but balance. To love another while remaining whole, because if you do not remain whole into this whole process, you are basically hating yourself in a way. So, to give without annihilating oneself. That is the meaning hidden in the small but crucial word, Mikra. A spiritual regulator, a reminder that harmony always lives in proportion. So when we turn to the word Synchoresis, we see that forgiveness originally meant to allow someone to exist within the space of your understanding, not because they are right, not because morality demands it, but because you recognize the limits of human perception. And when you truly understand this, hatred begins to dissolve almost on its own. You don't force yourself to suppress it because it simply stops making sense. You realize that each person moves within their level of awareness. But yet, it goes deeper. In the same dictionary, we have Agape, which is love, but it's stripped from its modern, purely emotional and abstract meaning, and it is also given a mathematical and kinetic root. The dictionary defines it as Agape para το άγιν το παν. Love, from agin, to lead, to carry. Το παν, the whole, everything, the cosmos. To unite and join everything toward harmony.
This is perhaps the only interpretation of love that gives it a true geometrical dimension, and this is likely because the lexicon Etymologicum Magnum is deeply Platonic in its essence. In another lexicon by Speusippus, we find the term agapisis, but again this is not what we imagine today. It is not a blurry emotion, it is a state of universal acceptance. It is the realization through deep understanding, through filtering, that we live in a multipolar space, a world that is filled with vastly different levels of consciousness and perception, and while understanding this, you understand also the meanings of justice, of freedom. So, in ancient Greek texts, you don't see the word agape that often. Instead, you constantly encounter Philotes. The word love, it seems to stem from the verb agame, meaning a friendly disposition, a good will, or even erotic attraction towards someone. But in this framework, love is not a virtue in itself. It is a process, a path toward achieving the virtue of Philotes. However, if the metron, the measure, is lost, love transforms then into pathos, which is a passion, and at that moment it loses every connection to the harmony of Philotes. So it stops having any correlation to justice and to the virtues. Now, the Etymologicum Magnum defines Agape as agotoman, the force that leads the all. It is possible that the lexicographer, writing in Constantinople around 1150 AD, was using the Christian word Agape to reintroduce the ancient forbidden concept of Philotes. We never know for sure, but what we do know is that during that period, the era of the Komnenos dynasty, there was a massive revival of Platonism. We have figures like Michael Psellos or John Italos that they were trying to marry ancient wisdom with Christian terminology as much as the church would allow, just to keep it alive. They were trying to sneak it in, so to speak. So there was a powerful revival of Platonic thought in what we call today Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire. A movement that was cut short by the fall of Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade in 1204. This era led to a collapse, and from the ruins emerged Plethon Gemistos, a man who deserves an entire video of his own, as he drastically influenced the period that we now call the Enlightenment period. Philotes, this is the root of the word filtron, a filter. On one level it is Empedocles' cosmic principle of attraction, but on the human level it is the ability to stand in a place of such self-awareness and discernment that you truly understand what is just and what is unjust, and you recognize what evolves the soul and what destroys the whole.
So in Greek philosophy, love is not a passive feeling. It is supposed to be an active guiding force that is connected to eros, not agape as we understand it today. So if Synchoresis is the act of giving space, then true agape is the act of steering that space toward a higher unity, a state of complete awareness where you perceive the different levels of consciousness of those around you and you act accordingly. According to what? According to justice. Don't just feel for them. You understand where the level is and you act accordingly. But you don't suffer about it. So, true love requires discernment. And this love is intelligent love. Your freedom stops when other people's freedom starts. And their freedom stops when your freedom starts. So it means that if someone's actions are destructive to the harmony of the whole, you have the responsibility to set them right too. But you don't need to get angry about it. You need to lead them back to their proper place, but you don't need to get angry and emotional about it. That's their level of understanding. So the enemy is just this obstacle intersecting your path. So we don't have a moral command to be nice. Now, Synchoresis means to forgive, to give space, to allow another human to exist within the horizon of your understanding, as we said. And once you see that, the whole world changes. Hatred becomes unnecessary. Now, remember the previous video about chaos? In the Timaeus, Plato is talking to us about Chora, as we said. What is Chora again? It is not matter, it is not form, it is not an object. It is the underlying field within which things are able to appear. Plato describes it as την του γίγνεσθε υποδοχήν, which is the receptacle of becoming. the space within which everything can come into existence. So as we said in the previous video, it's like the quantum field. Chora is the place that allows things to appear. It does not create them, it does not control them, it simply gives them space to exist. Now think of the word Synchoresis, syn plus choros, to give space together with someone else. If you see it this way, forgiveness begins to resemble a small cosmic act. You create space within your own consciousness so that another person can exist there, not because you agree with them, but because you understand their position within this field. So it is almost like a miniature reflection of the same cosmic function that Plato describes. If the enemy is the one who appears in front of your path, then you share this common space. And that's it. You don't justify them. Not because they are right, not because you should not face them or defend yourself, but because your consciousness has become wide enough to hold them and to recognize where they stand within their movement of their existence. And then the deeper layer of this is the choreo verb. You make space, you give space, you allow something to exist within this space, but it also means something very important: to move forward, to advance, to proceed. So this double meaning, it's not accidental, because when consciousness becomes spacious enough to contain something difficult, something painful, or something we disagree with, something else happens at the same time. We move forward. We are not longer trapped in reaction. We are no longer imprisoned by hate. We create this space, and that space allows movement. So forgiveness in ancient Greek is not passive tolerance. It is not forgetting. It is not a moral weakness. It is the act of consciousness that's becoming spacious enough to continue moving. To chori, to make room, and therefore being able to advance. The only thing the hater does, if you think about it, it's to freeze the mind. It traps consciousness in a very narrow circle. Understanding creates space, and space allows this movement. So, in that sense, forgiveness is not merely an ethical act. It is a form of inner progress, a widening of the field of consciousness that allows life itself to continue unfolding, because when the mind becomes spacious enough, it can finally move again. And because I said progress and proceed, from this same word comes Pro-Chorao. The word is simple. It is composed of two elements: pro, a prefix that can mean forward or before something, and it indicates either movement toward what lies ahead or something that comes prior to something else, like in words such as like prognosis or prologue. This movement, of course, should never be blind. To move forward means to remain aware of the space around you, to perceive what appears in your path, to understand where things stand. So in a way, the word itself almost whispers some kind of vigilance, quiet alertness. To prochorin is not simply to go ahead, it is to advance consciously, understanding what is happening around you. Because only when you have awareness, you can create that space, and then you can free yourself from what keeps you stuck. You create this space, And once there is space, you can move again. You can προχωρήν. Then movement becomes real progress, to move forward. Now we can finally see Leonidas for who he truly was, an architect of Philotes. He wasn't there out of hatred for the Persians, not out of rage for the divided Greeks who left him alone. Leonidas had every reason to be furious. The Greeks were totally fragmented, paralyzed by fear, and some city-states were even defecting. If Leonidas had trapped himself in his emotions, in the emotions of betrayal and resentment, his consciousness would have been narrowed down. He would have become just like the dividers. But what did he do with the weak Greeks? He didn't judge them. He actually protected them by giving them time and space. He applied Synchoresis, given space. He allowed the weakness of the Greeks to exist without letting it consume him. He understood that their level of consciousness at that moment was pure terror, and he fitted them into his strategic plan, and by doing so, he remained free to act with justice. He stood there because he applied the ultimate defense, to not be assimilated. Assimilated by what? By the terror of his countrymen or the hybris of Xerxes. He forgave them all by giving them the only space that he could give them, time. He gave time to the Greeks to organize, and he took time away from the Persians, stopping their expansion before the defense was ready. So he interrupted the flow. He held the narrows so that the whole would not be scattered. He became the filter that kept chaos out so that Greece could remain free. This is the love that leads to the all, the agotopan, a love that demands clarity, measure, and the absolute awareness of where you end and where the other begins. It is recorded that the Spartans laughed before the battle. They were free. Their laughter proves they did not hate the Persians. On the contrary, it reveals the level of their spirit. If they had feared or hated, they would have been assimilated by the energy of fear. Their laughter was a declaration. We are not part of your chaos. We are centered in our own Philotes. They didn't see the Persian as an evil to be hated, but as a kinetic and numerical problem to be managed. Because they had already προχωρήν, they had moved forward. They had taken the necessary distance even from death itself, becoming the very space in which the very future would be born. So, Leonidas became a filter of history. He saw the situation for what it was. He understood the right move at the right time, in the right place, and he acted according to justice and the principles of freedom. He allowed only the need for the survival of the whole to pass through him, while keeping division and enslavement outside the narrows, both spiritual narrows and the geographical ones. This is προχωρήν and this is Philotes. And maybe in the end, this is the only love that can save us today too. Now, some might try to dismiss all of this, and they will say, but hold on a minute, they had slaves. How can you talk about Philotes in a society that had the Helots? But that's exactly the point of total flattening. It is the tendency to look at the past through the narrow, safe lens of our current morality, and in doing so, we completely miss the archetype. Philotes is a cosmic principle. It is a frequency of the mind. Just as the Greeks understood the geometry of the stars while living in our world, they also understood the geometry of love while living in a world of harsh, ancient necessity. Think about it. They had every level of consciousness that we have today. They had philosophers, they had king philosophers, and in other places they had tyrants and oppressors. History is never black or white, it is always grey, everywhere, anywhere, at any point in time. So here we are looking at the archetypes of the philosophers, not the distortion of those archetypes created by tyrants or unconscious men or the everyday simple person who cannot understand these concepts. It all depends on one thing. Do you actually want to see the truth? Or do you prefer the comfort of a label? The fact that their social structure was imperfect doesn't delete the internal technology they developed. Think about it. They had every level of consciousness like we have today. In fact, in many cases, much higher levels of consciousness. We claim to have freedom today, yet we are slaves to our passions, our fears, our lack of measure, our inability to distinguish ideas with a capital I to ideologies and dogmatic thought. We have no physical slaves, yet we have no internal space. In fact, today's slavery is far more subtle, more indirect. Today we are all slaves, but it takes deep introspection to actually realize this. Leonidas at the pass isn't a hero because his society was perfect. He is a hero because his consciousness was centered. And he used the filter of Philotes to save a world that was just like ours, deeply flawed. Because if we wait for a perfect world to practice true love, true intelligent love, Philotes, we will never move forward. We will never prochorin. To prochorin is to move forward despite what is happening around you. It is to find your own narrows and hold them even when the rest of the world is flattening everything you believe in. So how do we perceive love today? Usually we treat love as an emotional transaction. We think it's about becoming one, about losing our boundaries, or demanding that someone else fills our inner gaps. We've turned love into a chaotic fusion where the self and the other disappear into a blur of what? Of expectations, I don't know. Philotes is teaching us something different. Real love isn't about losing your shape, it is about holding it. It is not about emotional drama, it's about geometrical clarity. Today, to love someone, truly, in the sense of Philotes, means to give them the space to exist as they are without letting their chaos become yours. It means being able to stand in your own narrows, refusing to be assimilated by the surrounding noise, and choosing to remain a force of unity. We have totally forgotten that love requires measure. It requires the discernment to know when to hold the line and when to let the flow continue. Leonidas didn't die for a feeling, he died for a principle of connection. And that is the challenge for us today. Can we love without being consumed? Can we create space instead of demanding it? Maybe if we start seeing love not as a sentiment, but as a conscious prochorin, moving forward with awareness, we might finally find the way out of our internal Thermopylae. And here's something else that the movie never told you. Leonidas was over 60 years old. He wasn't some young, hot-headed guy fueled by adrenaline. He was an elder. He was a man who had seen a lifetime of human nature. Hollywood, unfortunately, fails us again here. It presents the 300 just as a group of hyper-masculine men beating the hell out of others. It focuses on what? On the muscle, but it completely misses the mind. It fails to deliver the deeper philosophical meaning. But what can we do? We live in an age of total flattening, where everything deep, everything that has a deeper meaning is crushed into a simple spectacle. When a 60-year-old king stands in the Narrows, he isn't fighting for glory. He's acting out of a profound understanding of Metron and justice. He isn't being a macho, he's being a filter. True intelligent love requires a filter, a philitron. This is Philotes.